A single, trembling breath escaped Anna's lips as she stared at the letter clenched in her trembling hands. Ink had bled across the paper, but the words were still legible. I never loved you. I only stayed because I pitied you. Her husband's handwriting, unmistakable and cruel in its finality. The room was dim, draped in twilight, as if the world knew something sacred had been broken. She stood barefoot on the cold wooden floor, the silence around her broken only by the ticking of a clock that seemed to mock her stillness. Her heart, once a soft echo, now roared with disbelief. Outside, rain tapped lightly on the windowpane, a lullaby for the dying trust in her chest. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply folded the letter and laid it on the altar where once their wedding vows were framed. Something inside her had split, not loudly, but irrevocably. A truth had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same. Anna had always been the quiet one, the steady one. Her life, like a carefully folded origami crane, had taken years to shape. Delicate, intricate, quietly beautiful. She gave love the way monks offer incense, slowly, with reverence. But love, she had learned, was not always returned in kind. She had been a healer once, a nurse with hands that comforted the dying, a daughter who stitched her mother's grief with silence. But somehow, when it came to her own ache, no one noticed. The world praised her calm, her composure, never seeing the fractures that lived beneath. She walked barefoot through the house now, each step echoing like a prayer for something to hold on to. Her hands brushed the books they once read together, the plants she still watered alone. She whispered to herself, "This silence is mine now," not with sadness, but with a newfound clarity that scared her. The mirror didn't lie. Anna stood before it and stared at her reflection, as if meeting a stranger who carried her face. Her eyes, once full of warmth, now shimmered with rawness, like a storm had passed through them and never fully left. She tilted her head slightly, inspecting the scars no one else could see. "I gave him everything," she whispered. The woman in the glass didn't flinch. In fact, she looked stronger, like she had just returned from war. The silence in the house now became her teacher. It taught her that she had become a ghost in her own life. But the mirror, it gave her a choice. Continue to haunt or choose to return. And in that moment, a subtle shift happened. Not a resolution, not forgiveness, just awareness of the breath she took, of the life that still remained. She opened a drawer she hadn't touched in years. Inside were dried petals from their wedding bouquet, a rusted key, and an old postcard from Kyoto. Memories spilled out like ghosts too tired to haunt. Each item was a chapter in a book that now felt foreign. She picked up the key and held it against her chest. "This once opened our first apartment," she remembered aloud. There was no bitterness in her voice, only reverence for what had been. She placed each memory on the floor gently, as one would handle bones. These relics didn't belong to the woman she was now, but they had shaped her. Quiet wind stirred the curtains, and with it came something new. Not hope, not yet, but space. Space for something else to grow. Anna stepped into the backyard barefoot. The earth was damp from last night's rain, and the scent of wet soil clung to the air. She tilted her face toward the sky, eyes closed, and breathed deeply. Not to forget, not to forgive, but simply to be. The wind rustled the trees softly, as if acknowledging her presence. She stood in silence, palms open to the sky like a ritual. No thoughts, no prayers, just presence. Behind her the house stood like a relic, once filled with shared dreams, now an empty chapel of past devotion. But out here, beneath the open sky, she remembered herself, not as a wife or a woman broken, but as a soul returning to her own rhythm. And for the first time in a long time, Anna smiled, not for anyone else, but for the quiet that now belonged to her. The days blurred. Anna moved through them like a ghost in soft shoes, drifting between rooms that no longer echoed with another's voice. She found herself staring out the window for hours, watching leaves tremble in the wind as if they held answers. Her body ached, not with illness, but with the weight of unspoken questions. Why did he stay so long if love had left him? Why didn't she see it unraveling? Her thoughts turned on themselves, spiraling like autumn gusts. The solitude, once sacred, now gnawed at her edges. She couldn't sleep without hearing his phantom steps, couldn't eat without seeing his empty chair. Her home, once her sanctuary, had become her battlefield. Each breath was a skirmish. Each memory, a landmine. She whispered to herself, "I am losing to a ghost." And in that whisper was the beginning of war. Sleep betrayed her. Nights became strange rituals, lying still beneath layers of blankets, staring at the ceiling, counting old mistakes like rosary beads. Shadows stretched longer than they should, and the house creaked with memories. She would turn on the light, then off again, afraid of both. Some nights she would wander to the kitchen, fingers wrapped around a warm cup of tea she never drank. Her mother used to call this the hour of unspoken grief, that space between 2 and 4 a.m. where sorrow becomes a living thing. Anna knew it now. It would sit across from her in silence, wearing his face, repeating her failures in a voice only she could hear. And still, she welcomed it, as if suffering was her only way to keep him close. Better pain than emptiness, she thought, not realizing they were already the same. She walked the streets at dawn, wrapped in an old coat, as the city yawned itself awake. Morning mist clung to the sidewalk like uncertainty. The bakery on the corner was just opening. She remembered how he used to grab 2 croissants and say, "One's for now, one's for the walk." She passed it quickly. The world moved on. Couples walked dogs, buses exhaled, and strangers laughed. Their joy felt distant, like a language she used to speak but had forgotten. A man brushed past her, and she flinched as if his coat carried her ex-cologne. She stopped, pressed her palm to her chest. It wasn't the scent, it was the memory it unlocked. Of safety, of warmth. And just like that, the ache returned. The world kept moving, but inside her, something had stopped. At the bookstore they once visited every Saturday, Anna stood between 2 shelves, running her fingers over paper spines. She hadn't meant to come here. Her feet brought her unconsciously, like they remembered a time her mind tried to erase. The scent of old paper and wood polish struck her like a ghost's breath. She reached for a worn copy of The Prophet, his favorite. Inside, a note was tucked. To A, for the days when words feel more real than people. It wasn't signed, but she knew the handwriting. Her breath caught. Was this a cruel coincidence or an echo he had left behind for her to find? She sat on the floor between poetry and loss, the book open on her lap, her thumb tracing each underlined phrase like it might explain everything. Outside, the wind picked up. Inside, a storm had begun. That evening, Anna stood before a closet full of shared history. His coat still hung there, defiant in their silence. She reached for one, a charcoal peacoat, and pressed it to her face. His scent still lived in the fabric. Her fingers trembled. This was her battlefield, and she was finally ready to draw a line. She opened a box and began folding the remnants of their life together. Photos, cufflinks, handwritten notes. Each item, a wound she chose to close. Her breath slowed. Her spine straightened. "I'm not erasing you," she whispered. "I'm just choosing myself now." The final item was a small silver ring. She placed it gently on top of the pile. Then she closed the box. Not with rage, not with despair, but with the quiet dignity of someone who had finally decided to survive. Anna found herself inside her childhood bedroom, untouched since her father's funeral. The wallpaper, pale blue with faded stars, still held the quiet secrets of a girl who never felt seen. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands brushing across an old diary tucked between the mattresses. Pages curled from time and ink, bleeding from once cried tears. Flipping it open, she read, "I wish Dad would say he's proud." That ache had never left. Her husband's absence had simply mirrored her father's, silent men with unreachable hearts. She realized she had spent years trying to earn love that should have been freely given. A slow breath filled her lungs. This wasn't just heartbreak, it was repetition. A lifetime of chasing ghosts, seeking warmth from those who never learned to hold. In the quiet of that room, she whispered to the girl she once was, "You were always enough." The attic smelled of dust and forgotten time. Anna climbed the creaking ladder slowly, flashlight in hand, breath steady but heavy. She hadn't been up here since before the divorce talks began. Boxes stood like silent witnesses, marked with names, years, places. She opened one labeled, "Dad, Studio." Inside, photographs, sound tapes, and one unfinished painting. Her father's self-portrait. The brushstrokes were frantic, the eyes hollow. She remembered watching him paint, how he would lose hours in silence. He had spoken more through art than through words. A tear traced her cheek as she whispered, "You were broken too, weren't you?" In that moment, resentment gave way to recognition. Her father had not abandoned her, he had abandoned himself. And she, unknowingly, had married the same kind of silence. Pain had inherited pain, and now she was ready to break the chain. Anna sat at the kitchen table of her mother's house, sipping bitter tea as rain whispered on the windows. Her mother, older now, stirred sugar into her cup with slow, careful hands. "You loved too hard," her mother finally said, not as accusation, but as truth. Anna blinked. It wasn't pity in her mother's eyes, but recognition. They had both known men who vanished without leaving. "We teach what we survive," her mother added. It landed in Anna's chest, like a stone and a salve. Maybe she had learned endurance instead of boundaries. Maybe she had inherited silence as language. But now, sitting here, sharing the same tea and the same tired blood, she could feel it. An ending. Or maybe a beginning. "I want more," Anna said softly. Her mother only nodded, as if she'd waited decades to hear that. At the lake house where she once spent summers, Anna sat on the weathered dock, feet dangling just above the rippling water. The sky wore a golden haze, as if remembering childhood dreams. She used to believe this place was magic, where wishes flew from dandelions and pain dissolved into water. Now she whispered those same wishes, but for different reasons. "Let me release what was never mine to carry," she said aloud. A dragonfly landed on her knee, wings shimmering like stained glass. For a moment she smiled. It was small, barely there, but real. The reflection in the lake was clear, her face without his name beside it, her story without his edits. The past did not vanish, but it no longer dictated the present. The lake, like her, had held both storms and stillness, and now it cradled her calm. The mirror waited for her again, but this time it didn't scare her. Anna stood before it in silence, not to judge, not to fix, just to see. Her hair, a little longer now, her face lined with both wear and wisdom. She lifted her hand and gently touched the glass. "You survived," she said to the reflection, not as a question, but as an acknowledgement. She smiled, not wide, not bright, but steady. The woman in the mirror looked back without apology. Her eyes didn't plead. They knew. Behind them lived brokenness and resilience. Her voice returned softly. "I forgive you for all the times you believed you weren't enough." And with that, the mirror changed. It no longer showed damage. It reflected presence. It reflected her. Whole, not because she was unbroken, but because she had chosen to remain. Anna found the envelope tucked beneath a drawer liner, old, yellowed, addressed in her husband's handwriting but never opened. Her fingers hesitated. This wasn't part of the memories she had sorted. The letter trembled in her grasp as she sat, heart thudding with caution. She read, "I'm sorry I never said the truth. I loved you too much. And it scared me. You saw me too clearly. Something I never allowed anyone to do." She blinked. The words cracked her open in a new way, not a lie but a confession too late. She always thought she had been unloved. But maybe she had been loved in silence, in fear, in a broken language. It didn't erase the pain, but it changed the story. He hadn't stayed out of pity. He had stayed too long out of shame. And in that shame, he disappeared. Her tears came not as mourning, but as understanding. The letter lived in her pocket all day. She walked with it through the park they used to visit, each bench and tree familiar, but now cast in unfamiliar meaning. She stopped beside a willow tree where he once carved their initials, the faint heart still etched in bark. Her fingers found it easily. She pressed the letter to the carving. "You were afraid," she whispered to the wind, "and so was I." The truth wasn't pretty. It wasn't clean. But it was real. And in its honesty, it gave her something she hadn't felt in months: relief. She sat beneath the willow, back against the trunk, and let the letter rest in her lap. The sun pierced through the leaves in broken rays. For the first time, she didn't carry the story alone, and that made it lighter. Later that evening, she sat at her desk with an open journal. The letter beside her, she wrote her own response. Not to send, not to resolve, but to speak. "You broke me," she wrote, "but not because you didn't love me. You broke me because you did, and left anyway." The words flowed like a confession. "But I see now. It wasn't my fault. You were already breaking before you found me." She paused, hand over heart, breath steady. "And I tried to save you, but I've learned that drowning with someone is not the same as love." She closed the journal and wrapped it in a ribbon. An offering not to him, but to herself. A burial and a birth. She wasn't chasing understanding anymore. She had found it, and it was hers alone to keep. She visited his grave the next morning, a simple stone nestled beneath a Japanese maple. She hadn't come to ask questions or scream or forgive. She had come to witness. "You were never the villain," she said gently, laying a white camellia at the base. "You were just broken, like me, like everyone." The wind was quiet, as if listening. She sat cross-legged before the stone, closed her eyes, and placed both palms on the earth. Beneath the soil was a man she once knew, and maybe never fully did. Above the soil was a woman who had loved him, survived him, and finally outgrown him. "Thank you for the ache," she whispered. "It taught me where I end and where I begin." The maple rustled. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She simply breathed. That night, Anna stood beneath a sky heavy with stars, barefoot on the rooftop of her building. The city below hummed faintly, but up here, it was all silence and sky. She tilted her face upward, eyes wide open, not in prayer, but in presence. The stars didn't answer. They didn't need to. The answer had never been above her. It had always been within. She whispered, "I am no longer waiting to be chosen." Her voice carried across the wind like a vow. She stretched her arms outward, palms open to the universe, letting the night wrap around her. For the first time she felt whole. Not because she had filled the void, but because she had stopped trying. She was not the woman who had been left. She was the woman who had remained and risen. Anna stood in the shower, hot water cascading down her body like a storm she couldn't escape. The sound drowned everything, her thoughts, her breath, the hum of the world outside. Her hands pressed against the tile wall, forehead resting between them. For days she had been composed, strong, new, quietly healing. But now, she was unraveling. The truth, the grief, the lineage of wounds, all of it collided here in this small tiled chamber. Her knees buckled slightly, and she slid down to sit beneath the stream, water soaking her clothes, mixing with the tears she didn't know had returned. "Why wasn't I enough?" she whispered, barely audible beneath the roar. There was no reply. Just water, just heat, just her crumbling in a space that had once been for cleansing, now transformed into a sacred undoing. She wandered into her bedroom wrapped in a towel, skin flushed and eyes red. She looked at herself in the full-length mirror, not the one in the bathroom, but the tall one by the window. Her reflection was trembling. Not her body, but her identity. The woman who stared back at her was in between forms, neither the one who had been abandoned, nor the one who had fully returned. She placed a palm on the glass, then drew it back. "You're still here," she said. But this time, it wasn't a question. Her body wasn't the battleground anymore. It was the witness. She wasn't broken. She was shedding. And what hurt the most wasn't the love that left. It was realizing she had never really given it to herself. Not fully. Not like this. Night fell, and brought no sleep. Anna sat curled on her couch, wrapped in a blanket, surrounded by silence, thick as fog. Her phone lay untouched on the table. No messages, no missed calls. She stared at it like it might summon the past back into her arms. But nothing came. Loneliness crept in like a thief, but tonight, she didn't resist. She let it sit beside her. She let it speak. "You miss the comfort, not the person," it whispered. Her eyes closed, heart aching, not from longing, but from clarity. Love wasn't what she had lost. Illusion was. She wept, not from despair but from release. The tears were not desperate this time. They were sacred. Like rain after drought. She whispered, "Let it all go." And for once she did. She pulled out the old storage box again, the one she had packed weeks ago with the remnants of her relationship. Each item now felt distant, like artifacts of a life she once observed from afar. One by one she took them out and placed them in a metal bowl. Notes, photos, pieces of paper with dried petals. A match was struck. Flames licked the edges of memory. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She simply watched. Ash formed, light flickered, smoke curled into the ceiling like a soul ascending. "I don't need you to come back," she said aloud, the flames reflecting in her eyes. "I need to come back to myself." The fire wasn't destruction. It was reclamation. She wasn't losing anything. She was releasing everything. When the fire had cooled and ashes settled, she opened the window. Night air rushed in, cool, sharp, clean. She stood in the center of the room, arms loosely crossed, eyes closed. Her body, once tense, felt light, weightless. The silence no longer echoed. It resonated. She smiled, barely, but fully. Her breath deepened, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel borrowed. No longer trapped in waiting, in hoping, in mourning. She wasn't rebuilding anything. She was becoming something entirely new. The past didn't vanish. It softened. She whispered, "I forgive you," not to him but to herself. And in that moment, with stars blinking behind the open window, she stood in the stillness, not broken, not healed, but whole enough to begin again. The morning came without urgency. No alarms. No obligations. Just soft light spilling across her bedroom floor. Anna opened her eyes slowly, unstartled. Her breath was steady. She sat on the edge of her bed and noticed how still her body was, not bracing, not shrinking, just existing. She stood and made her bed, smoothing the corners like a small ritual of respect. The air felt different, even though nothing had changed. Except her. She brewed tea, not to silence the ache, but to honor the quiet. No television. No phone. Just the gentle sound of water boiling, the warmth of her cup, the birdsong outside. Life hadn't announced its return. It had simply crept in through the stillness. This was not joy yet, but it was peace. And that was something she hadn't felt in a long time. Anna stood at the kitchen counter slicing fruit for the first time without distraction. No music, no noise. Just the rhythm of the blade and the crisp scent of citrus. Her movements were slow, deliberate. Each slice a meditation. She plated the fruit like art, not out of vanity, but reverence for the moment. Then she sat by the window and ate in silence, watching the clouds drift. Her mind didn't race. It wandered gently. No guilt for the quiet. No hunger for answers. She wasn't fixing anything. She was simply being. These small acts, cutting fruit, eating slowly, noticing light, became prayers. She didn't know if healing had a finish line, but for now, she understood. This, too, was a way back to herself. And maybe that was the point. Not to be whole, but to be present. That afternoon, Anna visited the botanical garden alone. She walked without a plan, letting her feet follow the scent of jasmine and earth. Children's laughter echoed faintly in the distance, but she stayed near the quiet path. Her hand brushed over petals, her face tilted toward the sun, as if in conversation with it. At a small bench tucked between hedges, she sat and listened. Not to music, not to thought, but to presence. A bee hovered near. The air buzzed softly with unseen life. Everything here grows without permission, she thought. And yet, it all blooms. Her wounds, once loud and pulsing, now rested like softened scars. She did not need to blossom to be beautiful. Even her stillness was sacred. And in this garden, she wasn't healing. She was remembering what it felt like to live. Later, she returned home and found the piano untouched in the corner. It had collected dust like forgotten grief. Her fingers hovered above the keys, unsure. Then she pressed one, soft, hesitant. Then, another. A melody emerged, not polished, not perfect, but true. Her hands remembered what her heart had silenced. She closed her eyes and played, not to impress, not to perform, but to feel. Notes drifted into the room like incense. The music wasn't joyful. It was honest. Every keystroke said, "I'm still here." Her body swayed gently. The sound filled spaces that had once been filled with silence. She was not becoming someone new. She was returning to someone she'd abandoned. Her voice was in the keys. And the music, like her, didn't ask to be understood. It only asked to be heard. That night, she stood on her balcony with a cup of herbal tea, wrapped in a soft shawl. The sky was ink black and full of stars. She didn't seek meaning in them. She simply admired their presence. The city pulsed quietly below, but she remained untouched by its noise. Her breath rose in small clouds. Her mind, once a battlefield, was now a quiet meadow. "I don't need to be whole," she whispered. "I just need to be here." No fireworks. No dramatic conclusion. Just her, standing in the night, not trying to heal or forget, just existing. Her gaze turned inward and outward at once. The world was still wounded. So was she. But now, she knew how to sit with it. And that knowing, that stillness, it was enough. The rebuild was not loud. It was soft, but it was hers. Morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor like a blessing. Anna moved through it, barefoot, humming softly, her voice no longer a whisper, but a gentle rhythm. She prepared breakfast without hurry, cracking eggs, slicing avocado, toasting bread. It wasn't about the food. It was about the ritual, about showing up for herself. The house felt different. Not louder, not fuller, just alive. There was no haunting in the corners anymore. Only space. She opened the window and let the breeze in, carrying the scent of blooming lavender. She wasn't waiting for anyone. She wasn't trying to forget. She was simply present. There were still scars, but they no longer bled. She smiled as the toast popped, a soft joy in the mundane. This wasn't a return to the old her. This was a first encounter with someone new. Someone she had created from the ashes. Later, Anna rode her bike along the riverside path, hair pulled back, face to the wind. The wheels hummed, the trees blurred by, and her breath matched the rhythm of movement. She hadn't ridden in years, not since before everything fell apart. Now, with each push of the pedal, she felt more in her body, more in the now. People passed, joggers, children, couples, but she didn't compare or measure. She just moved. She let the breeze tangle her hair, the light flicker across her face. Her past rode behind her, not erased but no longer steering. She whispered, "I am not the pain. I am the one who survived it." The river glimmered beside her, and the sky above held no answers, only space. and that was all she needed. She visited her favorite bookstore again, but this time without searching. Her fingers danced along the spines not for longing, but for pleasure. A small poetry volume caught her eye, new, uncreased, unclaimed. She opened it to a random page. Let it fall away. What is true will stay. The words didn't strike like lightning. They settled like dew. She bought the book and tucked it into her bag like a secret. On the walk home, she didn't replay the past. She imagined the future. Not in detail, just as a soft unfolding possibility. She no longer needed answers. She had become the question. And in that mystery, there was peace. Her journey didn't end here. But this moment was its own kind of arrival. A quiet punctuation at the end of a long unfinished sentence. She visited the lake again. This time not in sorrow, but in reverence. The dock creaked as she walked its length, barefoot, face lifted to the soft wind. The sun began its descent, casting amber across the ripples. She sat at the end, feet just above the surface, and breathed. Not to let go. Not to hold on. Just to be. A dragonfly returned, hovering near her shoulder. You again, she whispered with a smile. She didn't need signs. She didn't seek closure. The lake no longer mirrored her grief. It reflected stillness, wholeness. Time moved differently here. And so did she. The woman who had once fallen apart on this dock now sat in quiet command of herself, no longer waiting for life to return. She had returned to life. One breath, one still lake, one sacred pause at a time. The stars returned, and so did she. Anna sat on the rooftop once more, not with questions, but with quiet. No music, no words, just sky. She looked up and let the vastness wrap around her, not as something to escape into, but something to belong to. The city below shimmered, unaware of her silence. The world kept turning, but she had changed. In her hands rested the closed poetry book. On her lips no prayer, only breath. Then, with a calm that came from nowhere and everywhere, she whispered the final truth. I am the home I was searching for. The words echoed not into the sky, but inward. A ripple, not a roar. The stars said nothing. And that was perfect. The journey had not ended. It had become her. And she, finally, belonged.